welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Mowbray, and in each episode I will discuss the key topics that impact on football coaching from the foundation and youth development phases. Thanks for listening, I hope you enjoy this episode. Danny, welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good too, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm excited about the topic we're going to cover today. I know it's a good one. We've not really done it before. There's not many things we've not spoken about over the last couple of years, but this is definitely a little bit different. I know it will tread on some of the stuff as part of other episodes we have spoken about, but it kind of sits in its own place as well. But we'll hold fire on that for a second or two, if that's okay. Just for our listeners at home, Danny, will you give us a bit of background to kind of who you are, what you do, and a bit of your journey and how you got to what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So, like most boys, especially around where we're from in Teesside area up in the northeast, boys and girls should say, like most boys, I grew up absolutely loving football. I think from about the age of 6 or 7, and probably the way I grew up actually shaped a little bit into how I try and coach today in the modern day. If I try and speak about that a little bit later on, but I grew up playing on the roads, playing on the field, playing at my local primary school, every hour of possible really. And then I signed for York City Centre of Excellence, I think when I was about 10 or 11 year old. That was actually about a 45-minute drive from where we're based, but at the time they had a really good setup and we're taking a lot of players from the Middlesbrough area. So I went to that 5 years. I was there, really enjoyed it, thought it was brilliant. Looking back now, maybe not as brilliant as I thought at the time, but I did. I had a good stint there. But unfortunately, the club at the time, sort of me leaving school, went into bad shape, and I got relegated down the leagues and went into administration. And I ended up going and doing a football course at a college in Darlington. Actually, some really good coaches there. Craig Little, who's now the head of the academy at Middlesbrough. Graham Jones, who is just at Newcastle now, isn't he? He was Roberto Martinez's assistant at Belgium. So I got a good tutorship there. And then I ended up actually, I think it was Craig Little who started it, got a trial at Middlesbrough when I was around about 18 and played a few games for the reserves and thought that was maybe the time that I was going to make a late break. It didn't quite happen for me. And then I sort of went and played, and it's called the Northern League where we are, sort of amateur sort of stuff. Couple of injuries, medial knee ligaments, these type of things, and I just sort of lost my way a little bit with the playing side of things. I then actually got a call from one of my old coaches at York to go out and work in Spain at a place called the Manga Club, which is a sports resort, a family holiday resort, but it's a sport. They have football there, they have tennis there, cricket there, that type of thing. And I actually really enjoyed the coaching side of things there. Actually a really good setup we had, and Brian, who had got me there, had got a few of the old York players there. We had a really good little setup, and it made me think, you know what, I want to go into coaching. By this time I'd already been helping out at the local Grassroots club near where I live, and I just decided from there that was me, and I came back and set up a sports coaching company, which I've still got today, sort of 10 years later.
And that is DF Next Level Coaching. Yeah.
So I remember at the time I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of my life. I wanted to get into coaching. I didn't know if maybe going into PE teaching or something like that was something I could do. So I remember now, I only remember it a little bit, just going to the bank and saying I want to set up a business. And I remember them asking, what do you want to call it? And I was thinking, I don't really know. I was sat there, so I just, my initials were there. So I just went, I'll just call it DF Coaching. And it's then since evolved recently with the Next Level afterwards, which sort of marked the 10 years we've been going. And then from there, it was actually relatively smooth, maybe smoother than people think. I was quite fortunate and quite lucky. I got into a few of the local primary schools, delivering after school clubs. And then all of a sudden it was like, do you want to do our PE here? And then we sort of started up outside of school sessions, and which we call like player development, which we've actually still got to this day, which is for kids that are just sort of starting out and playing at like a recreational level. And then we sort of progressed it from there, and yeah, here we are. The business was in a really good position pre-COVID. Been a tough year for any sort of sports coaching companies. However, it's in a position to sort of bounce back well.
Yeah.
And it was actually Middlesbrough, obviously the team that I was playing for a little bit and team that I supported, and then I've we've had a good relationship with Middlesbrough for a number of years now, past maybe 30 kids, 35 kids, something like that, into their academy over the last maybe 5 or 6 years. And I've sort of flirted with the idea of going and working there for a few years now, but it's difficult when you're in a role like mine where you're very busy on a lot of evenings and weekends to then take on an extra role like that. But it was actually during lockdown, the first lockdown, and maybe about April, June sometime. I remember thinking, you know what, it's the time to challenge myself now. I want to go in and work somewhere like this and be out my comfort zone, basically, where I'm getting observed and I have to sort of think more about what I'm delivering rather than just what suits me. So I remember I rang Craig Little and sort of, next time there's a vacancy in your academy, you know, please get in touch. And Phil Shedd, who's the head of coaching, got in touch a couple of days after that. And yeah, I got a place with the under-11s, and I've been there for since they came back in August now, really enjoying it.
So currently you're looking at you support the under-11s, the Middlesbrough, and you're doing obviously your own company as well with the DF Next Level Coaching. That's your two main jobs, if you like, at the moment.
Yes, yeah. So our business works primary school sports, but generally the biggest part of the business is our outside of school football academy, which has got, again, opportunities and sessions for kids from 2-3 years old in our mini Messi's section, as we call it, up to you know, your teenage years. And my role in the company after the transition into Middlesbrough is more of like a head coach, and I work generally at the sessions called high level player sessions, which are for kids of probably that sort of standard of either wanting to push into an academy or kids already at the academy. So I probably work with quite a lot of Middlesbrough, Sunderland and Newcastle players that come for additional training, whether that be small groups, one-to-ones or normal sessions.
And you call those higher level playing sessions? Is that what you call them?
Yeah, high level.
Use the word elite there, I notice. Is that a conscious thing? Because elite's the one that gets bandied around a lot, and I've my own views about that personally. But that seems like maybe a better way of putting it. But
it actually is. It is a conscious thing. Yeah, I may be wrong. I'm not sure. I've got something. I just don't like calling kids elite at that young age. For me, elite is signing a full-time scholarship. Sorry, at 16, 17 years old. 10, 11-year-olds, 6, 7-year-olds, to call them elite is really, really. I'm maybe a little bit against it for a couple of reasons. One being, I don't like the persona of it in terms of them sort of feeling like they're above other players, and that's not the kids' fault. It's the adults that have put that on them. And also, I'm sure you've seen in your experience of coaching that players develop at different rates, and there's some boy at 6 who you think's the best player you've ever seen by 9's just okay, and there might be a girl who doesn't even kick a ball until 10, but by 13 she's outstanding. And so high level player is a general term for, I try and explain it, of serious about the game, you know, really serious about improving, willing to do that little bit extra than what might be the norm, and wants to sort of progress.
I love that, actually, because you've gone straight there about attitude rather than ability, haven't you, as well? So that's about actually about mindset. And I would say that's so something that I think sometimes gets missed. We'll talk about academy football in a minute, but actually I know you can get blindsided by the skills of these wonderful young players, but actually the attitude is going to get them to the next level, right? And if you can see that as a coach developing young players, then surely that's going to be a better indicator to how they might succeed rather than necessarily how good they are on the ball.
Yeah. I would say a lot of my experience as a coach really does come from being out there on the pitch, and I've delivered a lot of hours over the last 10 years and really seen a complete variety of players, of attitudes, of abilities. I don't like to use the word talents either as such, because I'm not sure really what that is either. I think, yeah. And I've been there and I've made the mistakes, and I've pointed a 7-year-old and said, you know, you should see this player here, wait to see what they do. And actually, I don't think there's any real formula to predicting. You've got to try and evaluate their attitude a little bit, the circumstances around what could promote or hinder their development, and then you've got to try and nurture that as best you can. But I think like any form of job, that growth mindset where you're willing to take on challenges and just go for it, I guess, is a big thing, isn't it? Rather than just judging players on the general skill level they've got at the moment.
So Danny, how would you describe kind of your coaching philosophy and or principles, and how much of that is influenced by your own experience then as kind of playing at a decent level and having that kind of playing experience as well? How much has that steered the kind of coach you are now? And if we were to watch one of your sessions, what might that look like?
So I think when a coach talks about their philosophy, it's a big generalized question, isn't it? And we could, and I think a lot of us are capable of saying something that sounds really good. And I think, well, but when I thought about this question, I thought generally your philosophy is like the consistency of your like repeated actions on and off the training ground, I guess, isn't it? So I think if you came to my sessions, what you'd always see is a high focus on technical development, especially if I would say 80 to 90% of my work is probably with foundation phase. So players, so obviously I'm really looking at developing them technically. I like hard-working players, and when I say hard-working, it seems like such a simple word to say, but players who come along and they want to learn, they want to take things on board, they want to run, and not just because like they're running around a corner or something. I mean, they want to run because they're excited to be there and they're energetic. So I try and mix that like technical side with like a high intensity sort of focus towards in terms of their attitude. Good decision makers. I try and promote as much of my session around sort of getting the brain really working and thinking and really overloading the brain with information and cues so that they can hopefully sort of trigger that when they're playing. Try and sort of marry that up with like a general love of the game. I feel that if my sessions promote them things I've just spoke about, the players are going to enjoy them. They're going to come along. They're going to be desperate to come back. They're going to be inspired and want to go away and do a little bit more. And I think basing that all around, that's probably my individual player philosophy. On a team basis, I like exciting football. I like brave players who want to come and get on the ball, players who want to pick it up in tight areas and move it along, not scared to take risks. When you really look at what football is, you can't be scared to try things and get on the ball. And that's what I want to see, players that are involved in a team focus that are willing to do that.
Do you have any core values? Doesn't matter if you don't, but I just want to say, I know that some people have these like things that they're kind of almost like non-negotiables that, you know, in our little world, we've got respect, effort, fun that we kind of drill home to the younger players, the foundation phase. Or is yours more about just creating an environment that delivers that kind of high intensity and hard work and positivity just for the environment you create rather than actually the values that you kind of list words?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've got sort of a list of exact core values or non-negotiables. I've seen quite a few coaches that do this, but probably along the same lines of what you were just talking about there, how I want players to come along and feel like they're part of a group where we're all in it to help each other. I try and speak quite a lot about, you know, you can look at me and I'm going to be trying my absolute best to make you guys have the best experience. And I need a little bit of that back as well, because if you guys are making my experience enjoyable, I'm in turn going to deliver better for you guys. So I'm really quite big on players coming in, saying hello to you, saying hello to the group. When I say, right, guys, come and listen for a second, they're all running over, ready to train. At the end of the session, they're all high-fiving or fist bumping, whatever allowed to do these days, their teammates and who they've just played with and against. So I wouldn't say I've got core values as such where it's wrote down A, B, and C. But if you came along to sessions, you would probably see a similar thing.
That's the most important part, right? You get the feel for it, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know what position you played when you were a player, and then how much has your experience as a player has influenced kind of, you know, your coaching now. Did you have a great coaching journey and therefore you're just trying to replicate some of that stuff, or, you know, was there not so good and you want to make it better, or a bit of both? And how much did that position that you play influence your coaching now?
Yeah, I think my childhood and growing up trying to become a professional footballer has influenced how I coach a great deal. So when I look back, I had a really, really happy childhood. Obviously, dealing with the type of work I do, you come across a lot of factors, and parents is often a big one. And my parents were really, really supportive. They took me everywhere. Whatever, if I wanted to play football, I was allowed to play football. But I got it was a really, really relaxed environment I was probably brought up in. I was never, you know, that wasn't good enough today. You didn't work hard enough there. I never got any of that across my whole childhood. In fact, if I had a poor game, I sort of knew because my dad was very quiet. And if I had a good game, I knew because my dad would be speaking about like what we're having for Sunday lunch or something like that. it was not, it was never an analysis of the game or anything like that. And I grew up in an area where we had a lot of kids around that wanted to play football. So when I look back and I try and implement this in my coaching these days, and I try and think, how did I get to a technical level? I would say my strength as a player was my technical game. I played a little bit of all over, really. I started as a central midfielder. Then I went wide left. I'm a left-footed player. I ended up at Middlesbrough being a left back, or probably more of a left wing back, which I actually really enjoyed, sort of getting forward. And then when I went into men's football in the Northern League, I was a mixture of left back or centre midfield. So I've played a couple of areas, but technically was always an area, and probably still is, where I feel probably I'm most comfortable. And a lot of that was from playing with the ball. So we call it score, pick and partner. It might be Wembley doubles where you are, but we always call it score, pick and partner. And I must have played 10,000 games of this as a child. And the goalkeeper would boot the ball as far as he could. And I would always be the one who ran after it. I'd always the one who ran after it. And I look back and think, well, so that's an attitude thing straight away. I was willing to work hard. And then from there, I guess by accident, I'm coming back at players, taking players on. And maybe that's where I developed that sort of love for that side of the game. In terms of actual coaching, I was very much of the school of a lot of people. I'm 32 now. You turned up at training and you did a couple of laps around the pitch and you lined up for a quarter of an hour to get one shot at goal and had a 10 aside or something like that. But actually, when it was I must have been about 11, my dad took me to something that's called Football de Salo, which Simon Clifford started.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a variation of what futsal is today. Yeah. Again, looking back, the coaches there, it was nothing complicated. It was lots of ball mastery. It was lots of kick-up challenges, and it was lots of small-sided games before it was probably commonly known to do small-sided games, I guess. And when I look back at that, I used to go 2 or 3 times a week to that around my other football I did. And that really brought me on technically. If I look back at my childhood and think, why did I improve technically? It was a mixture of always having a ball at my feet in the house, in the garden, or in the road or the field, combined with going to a club like that where we'd maybe play 4-a-side for an hour. And actually, when you look back on it, you sort of start twigging and thinking, yeah. Actually, when I was at York City, and again, I thought that the coaching was very well organised at York and very structured. But actually, looking back, I was playing left midfield at the time. It was a lot of, at 13, 14-year-old, it was a lot of team share. It was a lot of big 11-a-sides, working patterns of play. You know, the ball's got to go here, then it's going to get clipped into the forward's feet, and I'm going to play off in there. And actually looking back at that, there's a lot of lost time on the training ground where I'm stood waiting, listening to the coach, but not really listening because I've become disinterested. Starting to switch off. And so I think, yeah, there's a long-winded answer to your question there. I think my experiences to an extent, like a reasonable level, as well as just that general real childlike love of the game I had, probably molded me into how to try and coach to this day.
Well, that's inevitable, I guess, isn't it? You know, you can't separate yourself as a person and as a coach from your own experience and your own journey. And that's whether you played at a high level or whether you're just kind of a mum or dad stepping up and getting involved. Your own experiences are going to have an impact on how you work with and support your players and all those other stakeholders involved with parents and everything else. So it's inevitable. And you make a really good point about your time at York, and actually on reflection, in fact, you probably learned a bit more since being a player. Or from a coach's eye at least, is maximising that training time, isn't it? It's so important to get the most out of it, you know, whether you've got 1 hour a week with your players or you've got 12 hours a week with your players, it's making the most of that time you've got with them, which kind of brings us on to the topic, if that's okay. So we're going to talk about really, not such comparing, but looking at coaching both in the grassroots space and at the academy space, which is something that obviously you do and you're familiar with. So we're going to delve around that a little bit, if that's all right, and just get your views on it. But I guess the first question is, from your experience, is there a difference between coaching at grassroots and coaching in an academy?
Yeah, so what I would say, Scott, is for the listeners, is I have done both. So I've got a lot of experience working with grassroots. I've got limited experience working within an academy, with me being less than a year in there. However, I've seen how the academy system has worked for a number of years now. and I've coached that sort of academy level players for quite a while. So I guess what I've got is a good understanding on how both works, and it's a generalization. So there is always people or setups that are exempt to the rule. There'll always be someone listening here that's like, well, we don't do that. We're actually much better than that. What I'm sort of going to speak about is generally looking at the overall picture, which I would say for a starter, within the grassroots setup, we have to look at the easy fact of you're not going to have as much resources. There isn't going to be maybe as much equipment, or the facilities might be, I don't know, some places they might be the same, some places they're not. We've all been at the different venues and seeing how it works. And then obviously at grassroots, you're bringing in a lot of volunteer coaches, which is brilliant. And it's very, very difficult. And one thing I don't like to do is to really criticize people who are volunteering their time to work with children. I've done it myself, and I've been in a position where I've made a lot of mistakes, and I look back and think, why was I doing that session? Why did I say that to that child at that time? What on earth was I thinking for my justification of that? So the last thing I want to do here is look like I'm sort of preaching on that. I would say in grassroots that there's very rare that you have a team that's got a curriculum as such. I think in academy there's definitely a better periodization of sort of what's going to go on. At Middlesbrough we work through a curriculum week by week, and then it sort of breaks generally around about the half-term weeks where we have like a creative week, a bit of freedom to do what we like, and then we sort of go back to week one again. But when we go back to week one, it's sort of like, can we touch on what we did last time, but then move it on a touch? Can we look at a few different principles this time around that? Where I think in grassroots system, and I've been there myself, it's quite ad hoc. A lot of it is based on what has previously been in the game at the weekend or what is to come in next weekend's game. And actually, when you really look at this, a lot, and this is where we've got to be careful because we have to make the experience as enjoyable as possible for children. Generally, a lot of coaches, and I've been there myself, and a lot of people listening will probably resonate with this, it's easier to pick on what's gone wrong rather than what's gone right. So these kids, they come and they work hard on a weekend, and then they get told, kept giving the ball away cheaply today. We're going to work on passing this week. So they get told the negative straight away. Then they come back to training 2 nights later, and it's like, right, Sunday, I don't know what we were thinking with our passing. So we've got this exercise worked here, and it's probably pretty boring. and it's sort of like it's really going at the kids again about what they've done wrong. And it's like they've spent the full session working on that, and then it's like, right, we get to the next game, and then we'll probably work on something that's gone wrong again the week after. It's only really when you step back and look at that, you think, surely that is not going to be what's going to optimally develop young players. And that's maybe something I would say from my experience of watching grassroots, that we could definitely be doing more in terms of looking at what the children need at that current stage of their development, at that age, age relative, what's going to benefit them most, and try and really put that into our training. I think you mentioned it just previously about contact time we've got with the players, and we'd all love more contact time, wouldn't we? It'd be absolutely great if we could have 6 hours a week training our grassroots teams. But the realistic thing is we probably get, I would say, an average of 3 hours. We've got to use that time as optimally as we can. And I would say in academies, there's a little bit more, there's a lot more focus on, they try and break down how the game looks at their age. And then the sessions will be sort of geared towards how we can optimally sort of take advantage of the time, relating it to sort of what's going on currently, and also adding in factors of what the future game might look like. So at Middlesbrough, for example, so I'm there tonight, and I'm with the under-11s, and our session topic is playing forward first, and that's one of the principles in terms of in possession. Is that, can we play forward first? And that might be in terms of a pass, it might be, can we dribble, can we see a counter-attack early? But also added into that session, we'll be looking at some IOP, some individual learning plans for the players. They'll be doing a little bit with the strength and conditioning coach around their movement. And then we'll sort of put all that together into how we structure the session, where generally in the grassroots, it might be more and I've got to be careful here because it's not right with everybody. It's not everybody that does this. Often it is how the adult thinks the game looks and we try and put that onto the kids. And you'll came across it, Scott and I have so many times, and I'll go back to, I'll just use the example of passing. It might be a passing drill, and it's unrealistic. It's boring. They might get 5 or 6 turns at it. Then the rest of the time they're maybe messing around, and the coach is telling them off for the behaviour, and there's not really that sort of any fun on it, a bit based around it. And that's not to say we don't have to work on passing, by the way. It's just I think there's a little bit more to be done in grassroots with how we educate the majority on how we implement that into our training. So it doesn't take much for maybe more an experienced coach to think, all right, we want to work on passing. We might play 3v3. One team can score in both goals with a first time finish. The other team can only keep the ball. And then after 2 minutes, we'll swap it around and see who wins the game. So straight away, you've probably done 10 times more passing, more realistic, more fun. And that's maybe where we're at a little bit with the grassroots. It's definitely getting better, but there's a long way to go still, I think.
And you made some great points in there. I think the one thing about being reactive as a grassroots football coach, and I'm sure if we look at ourselves, it'll be a bit like, we don't want to be, but you look at the game and think, oh, we've got to try and fix this problem now because that's what happened. But inevitably what changes the following week is the opposition, right? So actually the team you play against next week can go one of two ways. You may spend the week working on passing and the team next week isn't quite as strong and therefore you look wonderful. Now you fix that passing problem until you play a good team again, that actually gives you a different problem to solve and you can't solve that problem. So this kind of reactive firefighting thing, I've been there and tried it, and from my experience it just doesn't work. And actually having that plan in place where there's very little things you can fix in a week anyway. From my experience, again, I'm not that good a coach. I can't magic things up in a week. It's you need a good few weeks, if not months, to turn some of these things around and show some improvements. But having that plan in place and then kind of having the courage to stick to it, regardless of what the weekend may bring, I think it can be a challenge for grassroots coaches. And I'm sure for lots of reasons, volunteer parents haven't got a badge, as in a club badge, and the other parents are watching you and judging, all these things. And then the transference, actually doing a practice, actually is going to transfer to the reality of a game and actually help the players out. How is there any ideas, Danny, about how we could go about that as volunteer coaches? It's not easy to put a curriculum together, but is there any kind of easy wins we could do as coaches to help us have a bit of a more longer term plan for our coaching and our training?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was speaking to one of the volunteer coaches at our grassroots club. So our business, we feed a local grassroots club with our players. It's actually the club that I played for when I was young, called Leven, and it isn't massively connected. So once we feed the players in, the grassroots coaches, they volunteer and they go off with it. And it's something I'm trying to implement more, where we try and assist with the sort of overall structure and the curriculum and the development of the players. However, a lot of things come into this, and time being a big part of it. But a few of the coaches that come to me for advice, and one of them was asking this, and I said, sometimes we have no thought, and we just, right, we're going to work on this today, and it's very ad hoc. And I think what puts a lot of the grassroots coaches off is maybe thinking too much about it, getting all confused with it. So I sort of tried to put towards him of, he has an under-9s team. And I said, so generally, I think a lot of it wants to be a game-based approach. So when you're doing your training session, get as much games as you can, fun, fast, transitional, lots of different types of games. But if you want to sort of have your plan in place of what you're going to work on, just try and be quite simple with it and say, in possession, out of possession, and transitions, which is becoming more frequent the way modern day football evolves. And if you just be really simple and just look at it on them three areas, you could probably structure a nice curriculum of maybe working a month at a time or something like that, or however you want to do it, 1 week at a time, 6 weeks at a time, whatever it is, at each of them. And you can probably base your outcomes around that by just keeping it fun, keeping it that game-based approach. But you might be just mainly highlighting and focusing, I don't know, how you can win the ball back, or pressing, as we call it. So I sort of said to him, don't overcomplicate it. Maybe pick 3 things that you want to get out of the session. So say you're going to think, right, out of possession this week, and we're going to look at how quickly we recover as a team. Pick 3 key coaching points. Just keep speaking about it. Keep trying to get it across to the players. and do that in that approach I've just spoke about, rather than thinking like we're going to set up this, we see, and we've all done it, we see an exercise online that like, it's like a Bayern Munich warm-up or something like that. The first team have done the day before a game, and we're doing it with the under-9 team on a Tuesday night, and it's freezing. The players are just getting nothing from it. So yeah, I think you could maybe just break the game down into them areas. Kids love being in possession. They love to attack, to score goals, to dribble. Just got to look at when decision making comes in. When might you pass? Was that player in a better position, etc. Without the ball, it's becoming such a big part of the game. It always has been, but it's really becoming a big part of the game now. And then obviously the transitions of counter-attacking, of once you've lost the ball, how do we get it back? And if we can maybe break the game down into them areas, and then just think of some outcomes you want to get out of each session, that might be it.
And that's a great tip.
Just on the flip side to that, Scott, by doing my own sessions, when I do my own, so we might have let's say a high level under 11, 12 session Thursday night, I actually don't, because that's more developing individuals in a group session rather than developing a team, I actually don't really have a massive curriculum for that myself. I actually try and have an idea of what I want to come across, but actually, a lot of the time, just coach the moments that come out of the session. So I'll put my session across, and I might see that one player really taking advantage of a player being out of position and creating a 2v1 in an area, and I'll just go in there and quickly speak to them players and to the group, maybe individuals, maybe, I don't know, about what's the outcomes that are coming out of there, and that's good. Maybe you could look to try it in that area. The other team, how could you maybe look to prevent that? So I think it's important as a coach not to absolutely follow a schedule 100% where that's the only thing you do, but there has to be some form of structure in place to guide you. I guess guidance is the big word I'd get across.
They're great points, Danny. And I love the fact that in your first point, you're really talking about, us coaches at a grassroots level that can take on those suggestions relatively easily and try and play with those a little bit with our players in our sessions. But the second point then about actually being able to kind of put on a game or a practice, and almost the player be the curriculum kind of thing, where you watch what's going on and you work around that. And I think for some coaches that will come with experience and time. I certainly couldn't have done it from my first year or two of coaching. I think more now I could do some of that stuff. I'll be getting closer to it. But maybe that's an aspiration for us coaches to work towards. So if you're coaching now, if it's your first couple of years out there and you're doing under 7s, under 8s, well, that's fine. Stick to kind of the broader stuff. But by the time the players get to 11s and 12s, you'd have got more experience. You'd be able to do some of that probably more individual stuff. As a collective, which I think is one of those things that brings players on really well, because they love that personal touch. The game still goes on. And actually, if you can drive up some improvement in one player, that will obviously have impact on the other players. Because if they get technically better at beating a player or defending, well, the other player's got to raise their game then to counteract that, right? So you haven't got to do all these things from the beginning, is what I'm saying. That can be aspirational in your coaching journey to get to that ability to be more advanced in what you're doing in your sessions. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think everybody does it. We expect sort of the end product straight away, don't we? We're speaking to these 7-year-old kids, and we want this, and this, rather than I've seen players now that have come through from 6-year-old to 16. It's a long time, and there's a lot of time to work with these players. So I think it's really important what you're saying there is to be really age appropriate. Try and put into the sessions what is going to maximally develop them at that current stage of their development. I learned this quite a while ago of, I could be saying the best information possible. But if the kid at that age cannot understand that, or it's not ready for them, or they can't put that into their training or games going forward, it's wasted time, isn't it? I'm better off completely scaling it back and doing something that's more appropriate at the time. If I work with 6 and 7-year-olds, I try and have the ball rolling like pretty much the whole session, maybe 90% or something like that. I try and have it all as much as possible game based, maybe a little bit of ball mastery at the start or the end, but really for a few minutes, and then it's into it. I try and make it where the scores and they're all desperate to win, but that isn't the main outcome of the session. It's like they're just fun, and the kids want to beat each other, don't they? And at the end of the session, the score's actually forgotten. I can say that quite often, actually, when I get them in at the end and say, actually, the score's done now. We all have a great time. And I'm like, yes. And then obviously, when they get a little bit older, you can start to add more into that.
Danny, you mentioned that you like to focus on technical development of players, which, I think is one of the things we'll all recognise. One of the challenges I find is I like to have a games-based approach, and I'm not saying game be the teacher. I think we do coaching around that as well. So it's not just they don't just play a match and I'm watching on the sidelines. I am involved. Yeah. How do you approach improving players' individual technical ability, or as a collective, I guess, alongside a games-based approach?
Do you know what? I actually think one of the most overlooked parts of being a coach, actually, I think is to inspire. So I could put on a session that might be tick so many boxes, but if that hasn't really hit the kids that I'm working with at that time, they're not going to take as much from it. Where I might put on a session that's just been okay, but they've absolutely loved me. So they go home, and what do? They love football, so they get up half an hour earlier before school, and what do? They go in the garden and they play with the ball. Or they're so excited to be at the next session that they want to improve before they get to it, so that they go out and play a little bit more. So when I was thinking about sort of the real technical side of the game, I actually think a lot of it is done away from sessions. And I look at how I improved and how I sort of learn certain skills or movements with the ball, or how to receive it. And a lot of it was just done on my own. So a big part of my job, I think, as a coach, and what I'm constantly speaking to the players in my academy about, is a real love for the game. So, and the parents go mad with me because I say, dribble the ball around your house, and they're like, no. But I used to do it at home, and just like a little soft ball that like a dog would use or something like that. And I would dribble it, and I would do a step over and beat the door frame, and I would Cruyff turn into the kitchen. I remember every time I used to go upstairs, I used to flick the ball up and kick it up, and if it came back down, I'd do it again until it landed, and then I would go upstairs. So by doing this, as a byproduct of that is I'm improving technically. So I think what you're leaning towards with the question there, Scott, is we don't have that much time. If I spend 45 minutes of a session doing individual skills work, I personally feel I'm eating too much into the game-based approach type work, or whatever the focuses of the session. So I like to do a little bit maybe on arrival. So I might set an arrival activity, and it might be, right, there's the Neymar box over there. We've got the Sadio Mane box there. Can you go and show me the different moves that them players do? So that's sort of doing it. And I sometimes do it at the end of the session. So let's say we've got to be off the pitch at 7. You know what it's like, especially in grassroots, maybe not so much academies, where the next booking's coming on. I don't know, at 6:56, I might call them in, and it's like, right, ball each quickly. The balls are all ready to go. And they just fly around with them. And then it's like, right, orange team, stop, watch the yellows, and the yellows, see who can be the best. And the yellows are all trying to beat each other. And then, right, yellows, stop, oranges, go. And they're all trying. And I think just little bits like that, because I'm hoping that they're going to then take that away into their own time. And actually, across this last lockdown especially, I've been a front room coach. I'm doing so many Zoom ball mastery sessions from my living room. And I've really, really enjoyed it. And it's made me really think back to, especially, it can help all ages, but really 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, how much they can improve with a ball at their feet. Just by touching it more, just by constant repetition.
Touches,
yeah. Me actually in the front room wanting to challenge the players and not make the sessions boring. So I'm constantly changing what I'm doing. I've invented so many different combinations and skills.
I bet,
just by like taking 2 minutes before the session, messing around with the ball. Like, oh, that's good. I'll try that one. So yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer, but that was what I was saying. I will highlight in the session things, little coaching points, and it might be, I don't know, like just sitting into the ball, lifting your body weight on the front of your feet to receive it, just sort of have that little extra twist of your hips or that snap of your shoulders, and try and speak little individual bits. And I might be just pulling players off, but then I'll encourage the players to just touch the ball, because I don't want to be one of these coaches who thinks it's all about me. I'm not the main reason to improve a player. I don't know what you feel, but I think if I can help a player 10% and I've done a good job, I think they've probably got to help themselves 90%
We always say to the parents when they come on, when they start the season with us, the thing that will impact mostly on the players' development is what they do outside the sessions, not in the sessions. You know, our job is to try and create the passion. They want to carry stuff on outside. Now that can be football related, lows touch the ball, but it may just be climbing, jumping, you know, rolling, falling over, you know, whatever it might be, anything that gets their ABCs kind of going and stuff. I think it all helps, but we can drive that, can't we, as coaches, and we can create that hunger to want to go and run, jump, climb, kick, and all these things, not just in a session, but also outside the session.
Yeah, 100%. That, I think that's one of the key skills of any coach is to be liked. And I've heard some people before have said, you know, my job's not to be liked, it's to develop these players. I'm not sure, and you go right back to your school. Any teacher that you like, you want to behave better for. You want to work hard. You want to go to the lessons. It's exactly the same in football. And actually, I don't think this is generalised towards grassroots or academy. I think there's been examples, and there will be examples all the time in both, where children not really getting on with a coach, and their motivation suffers in the process.
You mentioned a couple of times already about the importance of understanding the age and stage of the players, and what I loved you said about the future game, which I think is one of those things that we can sometimes forget, that we're not coaching like under eights. We're not coaching for today's game. We're coaching for 10 years time potentially, and it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, right? I've seen quite a lot of academy sessions. I've been fortunate to be invited along and seen some really good stuff at academies, and I've seen loads of grassroots sessions as well. And the academy sessions are fun, they're engaging, they're high intensity, but what they're not is they're not serious. I mean, they're serious as in, like, you know, they're taken seriously, but you wouldn't, the players don't feel it's serious. And I'm talking about foundation phase here. So, you know, they're just there to play, and the coaches do a really good job of creating a kind of a real good play culture, getting the serious development in there, but not feeling that way to the players. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the grassroots sessions I've seen as well, and I've seen some fantastic grassroots sessions equally, but sometimes I feel like it's more serious in the grassroots sessions than it is at academies. And I'm not saying it should be one or the other, but that seems like that's not the best way round, if at all. And is that something you've seen, or more broadly, kind of what would you say about the environment comparison between the grassroots and academy coaching? And I do recognise you said it before, we are generalising here, and I know everyone's the same, but just as a generalisation, do you see something similar, or is that just where I've seen?
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. When I was just working in the grassroots and not really seeing the academy other than passing some players into them, I was actually a little bit naive to it as well. Even though I'd sort of seen the academy set up and been involved myself, and I thought, like a lot do, and they say, you know, it's so cutthroat in the academies, and it's too much pressure, and they just don't enjoy it the same in there. But do you know what? There'll be examples against this. However, from what I've seen, and I'm pretty certain on this from a lot of experience, especially in grassroots, I actually think grassroots is more of like a cutthroat, hostile environment than academies. I think because it's an academy, and because generally if a child, let's say a 10-year-old signs for an academy, there's a lot that goes with that. Friends talking, all the class know about it. Oh, do you know Jimmy signed for so-and-so? I think it's highlighted a little bit more when there is and like there will be, the odd one who drops out and they've not enjoyed it, or they've been released. But actually in the main, 99% of children, I think, that go into academies, that they really enjoy it. Our players, when they turn up at Middlesbrough, they're like sprinting over to the pitch. They're all excited. They have fun. The session structure is all based around to help them. It's very positive. There, of course, is constructive criticism, but there isn't making players feel isolated or feel like they haven't done this or that. Where at grassroots, there's all of that goes on what I've just said as well. However, there is too many still examples, and I've probably done it myself, so I don't want to sit here and say I've never done it, where a player's made to feel like they're not good enough, like they've let the team down. We talk about players getting released in academies, but actually I think they're given once a player gets signed, I think they're given every chance to develop within that club, and I think they're given them enough time. I think at least sort of 2 seasons a lot of the time. There's the odd example, but if not more, where I think we all know examples in grassroots of players who've been moved to another team or removed from a team. Or I don't know the stats, but I would bet any pound I've got that there's more examples of players not staying with the same grassroots team that they started with, rather than as opposed to players in the academy. And I think a lot of that comes from that sort of winning culture that we sort of still sort of pride ourselves on a little bit in the grassroots too much, don't we? And,
Yeah.
you know, how did we get on Sunday? We won 7-4. It's your first response, isn't it? Rather than, the players really improved at this part of the game. We often judge it by the scoreline. I think that has a big say in it. But no, I think what you're saying is right. I think the culture and the environment in academies is a little bit, and it's not done by accident. It's done on purpose to make the players feel safe, feel welcome, feel happy, not feel like they're on their way to being like future footballers, because there's a very honest expectation that there's only going to be, you know, if there's a couple out of each age group, that's brilliant. And to enjoy the experience and enjoy the ride with it. And I think a lot of the time the pressure actually probably just comes from each child's individual circumstances rather than the academy themselves. Yeah. So I spoke earlier about my dad and mum, you know, very good to me, no pressure put on me, but I put a lot on myself and a lot on myself. And when I stopped playing well as I could, or not enjoying it as much, it was purely on myself. And sometimes we forget that, don't we? That each individual is different.
And on that then, I mean, that's the kind of training experience. What about match days? Because again, this is something where I've probably got an agenda here. So I'm going to try and ask the question without it being a leading question. But academies will have their own match schedules that they'll play, and as will grassroots teams. Are they approached in similar ways, or from your experience, are they quite different too?
Yeah, again, always relative, isn't it? However, probably the best way to look at it is trying, as a rough guess of like percentages, how many grassroots managers, coaches, whatever, would prefer to win rather than a good performance? You'd be looking at a high percentage, wouldn't you? Where in the academy, it would be a high percentage the other way. And it's more relaxed. The match day is, you know, can we keep improving? Can we look at what we've done in training this week and implement it into a game environment? Of course, every academies have rivalries. Of course, naturally, as sports people, we want to win. However, it isn't viewed. I've been in Middlesbrough, like I said, since the summer. And the head of coaching's regularly been in touch with me around my personal development, how I'm going, how I'm enjoying it. Not one mention of any scoreline at any stage of how it's been going. It is purely just looking at how we can best help these individuals improve. Where the grassroots, and I've been there myself, judging yourself, it's like an ego thing, and you've got to sometimes step back and think, why am I doing this for? Judging your team on results, and results are great, but it should be a byproduct of development, not instead of development. And you'll come across lots of teams, and I've seen it where, let's say under 7 age, you've got a much greater chance of winning if the goalkeeper launches it from one end to the other, because the kids can't deal with it. It bounces all over. It'll be a deflection. It'll end up in the net the other side. And we're starting to get away from it to a little bit, but we're still quite a long way off, in my opinion, culture-wise, of realising that is not going to develop the players. The players don't want the ball. The players are hiding. The players just get it up that end somewhere. And I think more has to be done in terms of education towards that still. It makes me cringe on the sideline when I hear, and it isn't just the coaches, it's parents as well, get it out of there, you know, not in there, what are we trying that for? And one of my biggest pet hates is the defensive player comes across and smashes the ball 50 yards out of play when they had 10 yards of space, and the whole sideline's like clapping on the side. And I'm thinking the poor kid's getting so much praise here for effectively not developing himself as a player. No. Where, of course, and it's natural in academies that generally the coaches have got a better understanding. You know, it might be, John, what could you have done differently there? Could you have turned out? And obviously, that's where the improvement lies, I guess, doesn't it?
Definitely. And it's funny because, again, we're trying to coach players, these young players, for the future, right? And already we're seeing how much now we've got goalkeepers as, you know, as pretty much outfield players in the Premier League. And if they're expected to be kind of sweeper keepers in the Premier League and play from the back, surely we can let our under-7s have a little go at the playing from the back, you know, and things. And it seems we just got it wrong. I do understand it. It's emotive, you know, relatively low scoring games in comparison to other sports usually. I do understand it, but we have to see past the scoreline, things what you said. And I think that's a great way of putting it. See past the scoreline and maybe just reposition the word winning, because I don't have an issue with winning. I think that's absolutely fine. It's part of what we should be doing. It's a competitive sport. And I think we should go every Sunday and want to win our games. But if we're going to let the result or the scoreline influence the decisions we make as coaches, well, that's when we start getting things wrong. Because like you say, we start kicking the ball long, we start playing the strongest players more time, little Jimmy gets a bit less time or plays in one position, and all those bad stuff that stops them becoming the best players they could potentially be for their own abilities, just go straight away because the scoreline gets in the way. And if you can tell me as a grassroots coach what your first 5 or 6 results were when you first started coaching, well, I'd be worried if you could, but I bet you can't anyway, because that's not the important thing, is it? It's important on that Sunday maybe, or that Saturday, but it's not important 2 years later. What is important is how little Jimmy's got on, or how little Lucy's improved compared to what she was doing, 3 seasons ago. And that's the bit we've really got to work on still.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, we do have to look at coaching these players for what the game might look like in 10 years' time. And every coach and every team's got their own, or probably got their own philosophy. But it's just naive if we try and go against how the game's played, and players need to be comfortable on the ball. I actually, funnily enough, and this is really putting no disrespect to what the previous game looked like or how the game used to be, but in the summer I watched the Euro 96 games, and that was the first tournament I watched growing up. I think I was like 7-year-old. I absolutely loved it. But actually watching back the games now, I can't believe how much quicker the professional game is now. And then if we translate that into how we coach kids, they need to be so much better in 1v1 duels, in receiving the ball under pressure, in receiving to have their touch away, to move it or to turn or to dribble, whatever their decision is. But we can't take the decisions away from them because we're scared of what might happen, scared of the failure that probably is going to come from getting the ball in these tight areas. But we have to look at, and it's not about just creating future professionals, it's about creating kids that love the game, that want to play to their best standard of what they possibly can, whether that's the lowest of the lowest league to the top of the top, whatever
it's all
that
relative, isn't it? Yeah, it doesn't matter, does it, for that individual?
Yeah, exactly. And we have to sort of put them in environments where there's going to be failure, and we can sort of support that, and we can help that, and we can then look to progress them as players from that. I don't know anybody that's got anywhere in life without failing at it quite a few times.
No.
Exactly the same in coaching. It's exactly the same in playing.
My last question on this part of the topic really is just around collaboration. Do you think, academies and grassroots clubs work close enough together? I don't know, again, it's a generalization because I know some areas they probably do and other areas maybe not so much, but what's your experience of that? Could we do more? Could grassroots reach out to academies more, and could academies support grassroots clubs a bit better to try and fill some of these voids around the training and match day experience and just sharing good practice?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I'm in a position where I work and feed a grassroots club and work for a professional club, and there's not a great deal of communication goes on between the two, and it's the same. And we're probably a better example, actually. It's probably even less in a lot of areas. There's a general approach, isn't there? You see a scout at the grassroots game, it's like a lot of the focus is, right, get them away. They're not stealing our players. And then the academy, there's almost at times a sort of probably an accidental arrogance of, they're not as good as what we do. We don't really associate ourselves with them. When actually, if we could collaborate together, maybe the academies could pass on a little bit of their expertise and help with the grassroots. The grassroots could look to sort of facilitate and develop players to a level to pass to the academies. Then I think we'd be in a much better position. I'm not saying that we're miles away in England. I think the FA and the future game and the England DNA, I think everything's working and coming into fruition really nicely. But there's always more we can do, isn't there? And there's always more improvements we can make. And actually, I read, I'm quite fascinated by Athletic Bilbao, and obviously their club model of only taking Basque players.
Yep.
I don't actually know the logistics of how big that Basque area is. But still, to stay at the level they have as a club for so many years, only taking players from that area, they're doing something really right. And I looked into this a little bit, and I don't know the exact sum of money, but Bilbao pay something like 1.2 million euros a year to grassroots clubs in their area to develop coaches, facilities. And actually, it's different here in England because of the way the clubs run, and it's obviously a different culture there with their setup. But that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? 1.2 million is not a lot of money for certainly Premiership clubs around here, but it is a lot of money for grassroots clubs, split however many ways it is. It's a lot of money to develop, to resources, facilities, putting on programs to help the coaches. It might be trips into the club to inspire the players more. you've got to look at all these little marginal gains, all these little tiny areas we can help everyone, and the results will come from it, won't they?
That's a great example, because I know that's a self-imposed model they've created there at Bilbao, but exactly that. They have to maximise their catchment area. They have to support it. They have to maximise their training and work with the players that they've got, rather than just kind of select and reject, and you can see, to batter the level they batted at consistently with those self-inflicted kind of parameters around there is a massive achievement, and is a good point to highlight. It's a good kind of correlation between what we could do potentially over here if we worked a bit more closer together with one another. And again, I think there is more crossover, and things do seem to be improving. Certainly, to be fair, from my experience, whenever I've reached out to an academy, they've let me come and see sessions, and they helped me and supported my development. I've learned loads from that. I think there's loads more we could still do. It certainly helped.
Yeah, of course.
Danny, that's been excellent. But I know we're pushed time, so I've got a couple more questions. That's okay, and then we'll wind up. But that was brilliant. I think it's such an interesting topic, and something we haven't covered specifically. And my hope is that by touching it a little bit, we can just try and get coaches, especially the grassroots coaches, thinking a little bit about, okay, maybe I need to look at my sessions and think, okay, there's some great stuff going on in academies. How can I create an environment that's kind of as intense and, as beneficial to the players, but without it feeling like it's so serious? How can I create a match day experience that actually, we can focus on development rather than looking at the scoreline like they do at academies? And, how can I make sure that the players want to go and play a lot outside of the sessions as well as when they're with us in the sessions, and I think that's some of the great stuff that academies do generally speaking. And I think grassroots, even though I see that as well in grassroots, I think there's more we could do with that, and hopefully that's just shedded a bit of light on it. I just wondered what you thought about how coaching might evolve in the next 5 years. I know it's a big question, but is there anything you think could see changing drastically? We've kind of gone maybe more small-sided games recently, and more games-based and stuff, but do you see any particular evolution over the next 5 years in coaching, or with the work you're doing with next level coaching?
Yeah, of course, the game is constantly evolving, so we have to, and I quite often use this in my own example. I look back at sessions I'd done previously, maybe 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and the aim is to look back and think, that was all right, it could be better. And that's, at the time, you think it's brilliant, and then you look back and think, it was okay. And the sessions I'm putting on now, I want to look back in a year's time, or 2 years' time, or 5 years' time, and think, it was all right. I'm a lot better now. So I think individually, of course, we've got to look to keep improving with the game. And I think that's happening with there's a lot more CPD now. There's a lot more resources. There's a lot more online exposure. I think coaches who are motivated and want to improve, can improve. And I think the difficulty is sort of predicting how the game's going to look and then sort of tailoring our sessions to that. You look at the physical output of the game now, the amount of sprints players are doing and the distance they're covering. We've got to think, can we get that into our sessions? And where's that going to stop? Because sort of even with human evolution, everything moves on, and we've sort of got to look to do the same with ourselves in the session. I think certainly in academies, there's a little bit more. They look at the overall view a little bit more from what I've seen these days, rather than just the footballing view. They look at, can we do some multi-sports? Can we learn some transferable skills from there? Can we take an approach on how an NFL team work on a certain component of their team, whether it's like the wide receivers or whatever it is, and then maybe how can we put that into football? Maybe more specialist coaching in certain positions or certain areas. I think the psychology stuff's improving all the time. How can we tap into the minds of players, which is so important, isn't it? And I know there's a lot more going on in that area now, and I think in 5 years there'll be much more again. So I guess it's just a constant evolution.
My last question: if there was one thing you could change about the world of coaching, what might that be?
Maybe just the perception of what good coaching is, and I think that's something that's got to sort of be implemented with culture over time. But I've used this example before. I could bring 10 players to my academy and have their parents on the sideline, and I could talk for 75% of the time. I'm not saying I would do this, by the way. And the players would be stopped, like not even listening. And I could be really giving the technical spiel of whatever I wanted to say. And the parents afterwards would be like, that was brilliant. Or I could put on just 100%, I don't know, let's say a 2v2 tournament. They just move around and just play all night. And I guarantee you, I got at least 50% of them parents would go off saying, he did nothing tonight, that coach. He just, all he did was put them in two-a-side. When did they play two-a-side in a real game? And I think sort of it's what good coaching looks like. I still think there's a little bit of like more the stature of the coach rather than what the coach is actually doing. And I've heard people go, oh, we're going to this coach because he played 300 games for this club. And that might be a really, really good coach, but at the same time, it might also be a pretty average to low coach that's actually really not looked at how the Monday games played and how the child's coach. So I think there's still a long way to go on what actually is a good session, what is good coaching, what is good sort of tutorship. And obviously, if you look at how one-to-ones, the one-to-one private coaching market has sort of exploded over the last couple of years. There's a lot of good one-to-one coaches, don't get me wrong, and I do it myself. However, a lot of that is parents believing that one coach speaking to one player is going to make them better, quicker. It's probably not the case, is it? And it might help certain players a little bit. I always think if I do a one-to-one, I can maybe, if I improve the player like 1% in one area of the game, it's been a success. But the parents probably expect like a 50% transition as a player. So the point I'm getting at is just keep working and keep driving and keep sort of chipping away at what good looks like. Yeah. And that's what I would maybe like to see more of and change more in the next few years.
That's a great answer to that question, Danny. Really good answer to that question. And I think in some ways that's part of the problem we have as coaches, especially again in the grassroots space is, even if you believe in stuff, that you've got the conscious kind of almost that pressure to look like you know what you're doing, even if you don't, and actually it's okay not to know. And sometimes the chaos is good as well. It can be self-created, but you want to perceive that it's kind of nice and polished. And funnily enough, I think looking back at some coaches that I've seen, the ones that when I first started on my journey, the ones that always looked like they had full control of the group and it was very polished and stuff. On reflection now, I don't think those players have kicked on as much. And I think there's this challenge there. And some of the sessions I saw where it was more chaotic and it was more, it didn't look as polished from the outside. Those players can play football, they get the randomness of the game and can do things. So I guess you're just being brave enough to not worry too much about the perception and also help the players, help those watching understand that as well, so they understand, can see it from your point of view, not just from what, but then maybe their own experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I like my sessions. I like to be organised with a plan and have my cones and my footballs and my goals out. But then once it starts, it's chaotic. It's madness. There's players running all over. There's transitional. And someone on the side might be looking, thinking, where 5-6 years ago, it maybe would look more organised, but actually.
But what you're doing, don't you? You've got it under control. That's the point. You know what's happening, and you know what you're working on. It just, which is the right way it should be, right?
Exactly. And once them players can then control the chaos, that there's going to be a lot of good outcomes coming from it anyway.
Danny, you've been an absolute star. Thank you so much for being a brilliant guest. Thanks for covering the topic so well and making yourself available. I know you've been particularly busy as well, even through lockdown, so I'm grateful for your time. If listeners want to reach out to you and find out more about you and what you're up to, is there a good way to get hold of you?
Yeah, so our social media accounts, I think it's at DF Coaching. You can get on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So anyone's welcome to give us a follow, have a look at what we're doing, get in touch. I always enjoy talking football, so that would be brilliant, yeah.
Top man. Danny, thanks so much for today. I'm really grateful for your time. And look, maybe we say it to the guests, but if you're up to coming on at some point in the future, discuss about maybe how this stuff's evolved or moved on, or the work you're doing, love to have you back on again at some point if you're up for it.
I'd love to, yeah. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Top man. Thanks, Danny.